Hello, dear readers. How are you doing? I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader. So in my last video, I was a bit disappointed in some prize reading I had been doing recently. I was feeling a bit glum about reading, so I thought what better way to get over that than pick out some new books that I'm really excited about reading and that I really would like to get to. So I'm doing a book haul talking about a number of these books. So these are like a mixture of some are books that publishers have kindly sent me, and some are that I've gone out to bookshops and bought myself, as a special treat. So I'm going to talk about all of these. And the first one I want to talk about is a very special one. This is an older book called Hotel de Dream by Emma Tennant. And this was published in 1976, and this is the first edition. So I bought this from a very special new bookshop in London called The Second Shelf. I think it opened early this year, like 4 or 5 months ago. So this is their banner. And The Second Shelf is a feminist bookshop. And many years ago, there used to be a feminist bookshop in London called Silver Moon Bookshop on Charing Cross Road. I think it closed about 10 or 12 years ago. And I used to love going in there because obviously I love reading books by women. And it's so wonderful for discovering authors that I had never heard of before. And so The Second Shelf, it specializes in rare and special editions of books by women. And this is a novel that I went in there and I started wandering around. So to get to the shop, you have to go down this little alley near Soho, and you come into this square, which is really beautiful. There's a few different shops and a bar in this square. And I was having a good browse around the shop, and I came across this novel called Hotel de Dream, and I picked it out because there is a novel by Edmund White of the same name, which is a historical novel I love because it's Edmund White recreates the life of Stephen Crane, and this writes this sort of fictional novel that he was rumored to have started writing about a male prostitute, but no manuscript survives of that, and so he writes a novel around his circumstances of writing that. And so I thought, a novel called Hotel de Dream. I didn't know there was another book by that name. And the owner of the shop, the founder of the shop, noticed that I picked this up and came over and said, I love this novel. And she highly recommended it. And I had never heard of Emma Tennant before, which is sort of crazy because she's published quite a few novels. She's sadly no longer alive, but she published a number of novels in her lifetime, and she founded a literary journal called Bananas, which in, I think, the 70s, she published, was one of the first publishers of Angela Carter, and a number of different writers who went on to be quite influential writers. And so she's quite big on the literary scene, but she doesn't seem to be much read nowadays. And she had written a number of quite experimental novels. I think she wrote one which was sort of a rewriting of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from a feminist point of view, where it's about Dr. Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde. And so this novel, Hotel de Dream, is about a gritty flat in Kensington and about the lives of a number of people that live in this tenement building, and how their dream lives start to intersect with each other. I've heard this described in one review as reminding them of Cloud Atlas, David Mitchell's novel Cloud Atlas, and so yeah, it sounds like such a curious novel. So I'm so eager to read it, and yeah, if you come to London, I really encourage you to go to The Second Shelf and seek it out because it's a lovely bookshop, and of course. We all know the booktuber Britta Bowler's channel. She calls her channel the Second Shelf. So Britta, if you ever come to London, we need to go to The Second Shelf together and check it out together. And the next book I want to talk about is called Lux by Elizabeth Cook. And this has really lovely cover, and not just a lovely cover, but look at the insides. It is beautiful. And this is, it was interesting how I found out about this novel because actually Matthew Sharapa first messaged me about this novel and said, oh, this looks really interesting. But that same day, I went to the Man Booker International Prize shortlist party, and Scribe Publications, who published this, were at that party because they had 2 books on the long list for the Man Booker International Prize, including At Dusk, the novel that I really loved and was hoping would be on the shortlist, but wasn't, unfortunately. And so I was chatting with them because I've known a number of people that work there for a few years. They publish really interesting new books, and they started telling me about their new books, and they started talking about this book Lux, and I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. Where have I heard of that before? And lo and behold, Matthew had just been talking to me about it earlier that day, so it seemed a crazy coincidence, and it seemed like oh yeah, this is a book that I should really get. So so I got a copy, and I don't really know how to summarize the story. It involves King David and Henry VIII, King Henry, and how their lives sort of intersect over time because of a poet that kind of connects their lives. It's yeah, so it's a novel that is a historical novel, but one that sort of traverses time a bit, or plays with time. Yeah, not really sure how to describe it, but it sounds really intriguing. And speaking of the Man Booker International Prize, one of the books shortlisted that I love and keep going on about because I just think it's such an incredible book is The Years by Annie Ernaux, and I really want to read more by Annie Ernaux. So this is another recent publication of hers, or a recent translation. It's been translated into English, called Happening, and it's another book that is it's a much shorter book. It's combines sort of memoir and nonfiction and social commentary. So but it's very much about her life and when she was a young woman, and how she had an unexpected pregnancy which she wanted to terminate and wasn't able to terminate at that time because abortion was illegal, and the steps she took to try to go through an illegal abortion. And so it's her reflecting on that period of her life and what that did to her, what she went through, and the politics of all of that. And yes, it sounds really powerful. Skin by Liam Brown. This is a sort of dystopian novel, or a novel set in a time when a disease spreads across the globe, where people become allergic to each other's skin and aren't able to touch each other anymore. And so this obviously produces lots of feelings of isolation and loneliness. But then a man enters this one particular community who can touch other people. And so it's about people re-experiencing the sense of touch again. Stranger City by Linda Grant. And I've read a couple of Linda Grant's novels before. Which ones have I read? There was Upstairs at the Party and The Dark Circle, which I think was longlisted for the Women's Prize or the Bailey's Prize a couple years ago. And yeah, and I really enjoy her writing, and always want to read more because there's several of her novels I haven't read. And this is her new novel called The Stranger City, and it involves the story of a woman whose body is found near the HMS Belfast, which is a warship which is permanently docked in the Thames. And about the people who find her, and then the lives of several different people in London who, like on the surface, like London is a very sort of welcoming and integrated city, but then in some other ways, it's a city with a lot of isolated individuals and isolated communities that don't really interact with each other all that much. And so I think this novel sort of explores those different relationships through the lives of a number of different individuals. He Is Mine and I Have No Other by Rebecca O'Connor, and I really love this cover. And this is an Irish novel about a teenage girl who falls for a boy in her village, her small Irish village. But the boy has his family has a number of secrets in their past, and so it's about their developing relationship and the complications of when those secrets come to light. And yeah, this is a novel that's blurbed by Sophie Mackintosh, who wrote The Water Cure, which is a novel, was one of my favorite novels that I read last year. Cygnet by Susan Butler, and this is another book which has a beautiful cover. It has this sort of, it's a bit difficult to see, but it has this sort of silver lines going all throughout the cover. It's really gorgeous. And this is published by Dialogue Books, which is an imprint that I've talked about a number of times, which is really exciting. They publish a lot of really exciting new books. And Cygnet is a dystopian novel set on an island where it's a group of older people have chosen to isolate themselves on this island because society is collapsing around them. And it's quite self-consciously a community of old people who don't want to have anything to do with young people anymore. And it's about a young woman who is sort of her parents leave and she doesn't know where they went, and she goes to live on this island, and it's about that clash of a young person trying to integrate in this community of older people. Being Various, this is an anthology which I am so excited about, edited by Lucy Caldwell, who's an Irish writer that I've read her book. I think it was called Multitudes. She had a book of short stories, a really excellent book of short stories. And this anthology of new Irish fiction that she's edited and put together with some of the most exciting new Irish writers around. I'd like to make a video sometime about new Irish writing, because there are so many exciting Irish writers, and I'm just particularly prone to Irish writing. And so, yeah, this includes authors like Lisa McNerney, who wrote The Glorious Heresies, and Danielle McLaughlin, who wrote the excellent book of short stories, Dinosaurs on Other Planets, and who has a forthcoming novel, and Belinda McKeon, and Emer McBride, and Kevin Barry, and Sinead Gleeson, whose book Constellations I talked about in my last wrap-up video and I loved so much, and a number of authors that I've not heard before and who I'm excited to discover. So yeah, I'm so excited to read this, and it's always hard to know with an anthology, particularly an anthology made up of lots of different writers, of like where to start. But yeah, I think I'll just pick and choose and skip throughout it to see what to read next. Underland by Robert Macfarlane, and how gorgeous is this cover? It's really striking and beautiful. And actually, I went to see Robert Macfarlane speak just last night at the South Bank Center. He gave a talk about this new book and his work in general. And so this is a book of nonfiction, sort of looking at nature and a lot of encounters with nature that he's had going underground. So he went into a number of different caves and looked at the bottom of a number of different glaciers and spent some time living next to glaciers. And so it's his examinations of the natural world in this time of rapid change and what we're doing to the planet, and the communities how communities in these areas are affected by climate change, and he's talking about this concept of deep time, which is a concept that he didn't originate. Another scientist originated it, but it's looking at the natural world of where you see these layers of time through the physical environment, and like looking at mountains or going down in caves and seeing how there are layers of history there, like imprinted on the actual physical space. And he gave such a beautiful and meaningful talk. If you follow his Twitter account, he's a sort of archaeologist of these words, which aren't commonly used anymore, but which are very poetic and describe the environment in a really striking way. And yeah, he's just this calm, really like curious individual who seems really compassionate and interested in the natural world and language and history and stories and communities, and yeah, just wonderful. So yeah, I'm so eager to read this. The Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Henriquez. And this, I don't think this is a new novel. I think it was published several years ago, but it's the first time it's been published in the UK, I believe. I think that's right. And this is about a immigrant family who settles in Delaware and how they hope to start a new lives for themselves there, but encounter a number of difficulties that they didn't expect. Faber and Faber, The Untold Story by Toby Faber. And I think it's really interesting how, I mean, before I started blogging or YouTubing, I wasn't all that aware of publishers all that much themselves. I just would read books and I didn't really care who published them. But I've become much more conscious over time of publishers that I am naturally drawn to because they seem to put out books that I just tend to like more than some other books. And Faber is definitely one of the publishers that I would say is like one of my top publishers, because they consistently publish really interesting, exciting new fiction. Although, you know, some of their cover choices are a bit dodgy, like I talked about in the Women's Prize video, and also the video I made about Sebastian Barry's novel, which I had a lot of issues with. But Faber is celebrating their 90th anniversary this year, and so this is a sort of history of that publisher and the stories behind the publishers and a lot of the authors that they've published before. And it's interesting because, I mean, we don't really think about too much about how publishers are really instrumental in fostering the talents of authors that we enjoy and love. And, you know, and if it wasn't for that encouragement, I think some of these authors might, you know, never have had their books come out, because, you know, publishers take a chance on authors sometimes who might not have been published anywhere else, and who go on to be really successful and influential. And so, yeah, I think it'll be interesting reading about the stories behind some of those authors. And so Faber has published people like T.S. Eliot and Sylvia Plath. And so this is looking at some of those stories, and has a number of includes a number of documents relating to that, and some photos of their interactions with these authors. And it's nice, on the inside cover it has the signatures of some of the most famous authors that they've published over the years. So yeah, I think it just it sounds like a fun, interesting story to sort of look at behind the scenes. And I love on the cover how you can pick out some famous authors like Samuel Beckett and Kazuo Ishiguro. The Furies by Katie Lowe. And this is a novel that the tagline really sold me. I don't know, you know, sometimes taglines can I think sort of hinder the experience of a book, because, you know, it just makes you think it'll really be like that other thing. But so this is described as a secret history by Donna Tartt meets The Craft, the movie The Craft. And that totally sells me. I'm just like, wow, yeah, that's a book that I want to read. So this is a novel that is about a young woman who moves to a community that was famous for having witch trials a long time ago. And it's about how she becomes friends with a group of girls there, it's very like The Craft, who are sort of dabbling in witchcraft. And a young woman in the community turns up dead under very mysterious circumstances. And so it's about the tricky territory of being a teenager and wanting to ingratiate yourselves with a new group of friends, and the dodgy practices that they get involved in. Animals Eat Each Other by Elle, Nash. And this has a really striking cover too. And it's about a young woman who gets involved in a three-way relationship, so with a relationship with a man and a woman, and about the complexities of that relationship. And I don't know, should I admit this? I don't know if I would admit this, but when I was a teenager, I had a relationship with a married couple, with a man and a woman. And yeah, we had this sort of three-way relationship for a while. And I can attest, it was very complicated. And because, you know, I mean, it's hard enough, I think, being in a relationship with another person and dealing with another person's ego as well as confronting your own ego, but to have two egos that you're sort of wrestling with while trying to have this relationship with them, it's very tricky territory. Next is another book of nonfiction, or memoirist nonfiction, called Surrender by Joanna Pocock. And this is a story about her time that she spent in Montana. She spent a couple of years in Montana getting involved with this community and sort of radical environmentalists in this community, and getting to know a number of them and the radical environmental movement. And yeah, so I sort of think this sounds like Richard Powers' novel The Overstory, but it's true, it's actually factual. So yeah, that makes me really curious to read it. Saltwater by Jessica Andrews. And this is a novel about a young woman who moves to London I think she starts university and wants to start a new life for herself in London after leaving her small community, but finds life in the city is much more complicated than she expected. And so she goes back to live in Ireland for a time to try to recollect herself, and so it's recounting her journey doing that. And this has a blurb on it by Daisy Johnson, the really interesting new writer Daisy Johnson, whose book was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize last year. My House is Falling Down by Mary Loudon, and this is a novel about a woman who's sort of adrift in her life and finds that she wants to have the security of a husband while still having relationships with other people. So it's about the complexities of infidelity and everything that involves. Manchester Happened by Jennifer Nansambuga Makumbi, and this is an author who I read her novel Chintu last year and really enjoyed, and this is a new book of short stories with a really beautiful cover, and it's about the lives of a number of different Ugandan individuals who moved to England and the complex questions that they ask themselves. And I think she's a really exciting new author, so yeah, I'm very excited to read some of her short stories as well. Queer Intentions by Amelia Abraham, and this is another book of sort of memoirist nonfiction or journalism, where the author looks at what it means to be a queer individual in 2019 and how increasingly in the West LGBT rights are being granted and same-sex marriage is becoming legalized in a number of different countries, but she wonders about the question of what does that mean for queer lives of sort of integrating into mainstream society, and her book is investigating that question, so I'm really interested in this. Saltwater by Julia Armfield, and this is a debut book of short stories, and this is a proof copy, but the finished copy of this novel is absolutely beautiful, and she's a much acclaimed writer, but this is her debut book, and so these are short stories which cover a whole range of subjects looking at women's bodies and about obsession and love, and lots of big questions, and so I'm very excited to explore these new stories. And finally, there is a novel which wouldn't normally be my sort of book, but I saw the author speaking about this book, and it just sort of drew me in and made me really excited to read it and really interested to read it. It's called How Do You Like Me Now by Holly Bourne. And this is a novel just all about the perils and the pitfalls of the social media age and getting involved in social media. And I just think that sounds really interesting to explore. So I'd really like to read this story. I think it'd be a really fun and interesting book to read. So those are all the books that I want to talk about. Let me know which ones you are most interested in, and let me know what other new books that you found and bought recently and what you're really excited to read next. So I hope you're doing well and have a good day, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye everyone.